Hey everybody, hope your day's going well. In this video, I'm going to go over something that I started having trouble with after a few years of playing D&D, particularly in being a DM. And that's the concept of alignment and evil. And I decided that there were some problems with it. Not with the alignment system per se, just the way that it was used to justify certain things didn't quite make sense to me. So I've made videos about the 5-factor model, but there's also the dark triad model. So I've got this iconic image here from the original, D&D. And here we see the alignment sort of broken down. We see somebody trying to prevent somebody from harming a monster. A monster that would be considered evil. Then we've got the guy here trying to harm the monster. And then we've got a guy that's sort of aloof and standing there just sort of watching the whole thing happen. And so what I had a problem with is the idea, and it's kind of funny because it was actually the Time Bandits that got me kind of thinking about it. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, Monty Python's The Time Bandits. It's a very good movie. And they introduced the concept of evil as a substance. So they had, I forget exactly what it was, they had a bottle or a vial or something that was absolute evil. The concept that evil was a substance, which didn't, they were obviously making fun. And it isn't a concept that really makes sense to me. I don't really picture, evil like that. So that led me to start wondering and questioning why certain monsters were evil, what made them evil, and what exactly evil is. And I'm not going to try and answer that question for anybody here. But what I am delving into is my own use of the dark triad to make the concept of evil more palatable to me. Because it seems to me that in RPG games, a lot of the idea of evil is sort of what has been used throughout since the beginning of human history, I suppose, is if you want your neighbor's stuff, you basically just have to declare them evil. And if they're evil, then that justifies going and bonking them on the head and taking their stuff. So this led me to wonder, what classifications are there for evil? Now, we live in the modern time, so it's a little bit different. Not much, though. I'm not sure it's different at all, but we like to think that we're more enlightened. So what happens is when you've got a village here and you've got a village here, and somebody in this village decides they want this village's stuff, they have to somehow come up with a concept of why these people are evil. And if they can label them as evil, then they can go get their stuff. This is sort of how, the very beginnings of how a war would start. So if this village goes and does something that you don't like, then you can declare that they're evil. If this village, say, violates some of your social norms, you can say, well, they're evil because nobody sensible would ever do anything like that. And vice versa. These guys could declare these ones evil just by virtue of when they attack. Then all of a sudden this village becomes evil to this village. They can do that. And this is sort of a universally accepted method for acquiring stuff it seems like in the modern age too, but certainly in the past it was. You basically had to look at your opponent. You had to figure out what they were doing wrong or what would make them evil, convince a bunch of people that that was the case, and then that justified doing whatever you wanted. So in D&D, I found that when monsters are just labeled evil, for myself anyway, it doesn't necessarily mean to me that they're evil. There has to, unless they've got this evil substance, this bottle this vial of evil. They've somehow drank that bottle of evil and they became evil. Which is fine in a fantasy world. I mean, that does make sense, I suppose, in a fantasy world, but it doesn't make sense to me in reality. And I do like sort of my fantasy game to have some sort of touchstones of reality, if you like. So that led me to, reading about the 5-factor model and analyzing the concepts of evil as they pertain to my game. And this is where the Dark Triad comes into play for me. Now, the Dark Triad is sort of a collection of attributes that a person can acquire that would lead them to sort of discount other people's feelings, circumstances, and be unable to relate to them, to lack empathy towards that person, which I think pretty much is universally condemned, unless, of course, you've decided the other side is evil. Then, of course, you can carry on however you like because, well, they're evil and you're battling evil. And battling evil, the antithesis of that, obviously, is good. So you must be good if they're evil. So what I've found personally in, reading history over the years is that usually the people making the justifications for war are themselves on the Dark Triad somewhere, and they're manipulating what would otherwise be, quote-unquote good people into heinous acts because they've convinced the people that those other people are evil. Now, that isn't to say that people that take part in certain activities shouldn't be stopped. Obviously, they should, and sometimes that just has to happen. But I do think that a great deal of caution needs to be used. In particular, and we'll get into it, is because of the attributes of the Dark Triad. So the Dark Triad, set of attributes. So one of them is narcissism. Narcissism comes from the idea of Narcissus, who was a god that fell in love with himself when he saw his reflection in a pool of water. Psychopathy is the idea that there are some people out there that completely lack empathy or lack the usual amounts of empathy that other people would have, and there's certain attributes that go along with that. And there's Machiavellianism, which is probably the most difficult concept to understand. Now, what I would recommend, if you really want to understand Machiavellianism, is go to the source, which Machiavelli was actually a person and that wrote a book called The Prince. And this is sort of the handbook for the Machiavellian. And it's a handbook for how to rule people. So this book is absolutely fascinating. It's scary. And it's explaining how the sort of a society's elite can control the people under them by lying and manipulation and just by using their power and how that power affects other people and so forth. Like, I'll give an example. Machiavelli talks about how most people, when they encounter a prince, that is somebody they think of as their better, will usually give that person their most prized possession. And so I've been watching carefully over my life after reading this book, and I absolutely believe that to be the case. If someone can convince a group of people that they are their better, then to win favor with that person, they will gladly give up their most prized possession. Very odd behavior. But I did identify it in myself, and I've seen it in other people. I learned to stop it. I don't do that anymore. if somebody pretends to be my better, or assumes they are, or I think they're my better, I am aware that I have a tendency to want to win favor. I stop now, thanks to this book. And there's many other things in this book. This book is absolutely amazing. It's a must read for anybody interested in this sort of thing. So, the Dark Triad is interesting in that these attributes. Basically, if somebody's narcissistic, they will have Machiavellian attributes and psychopathic attributes. Likewise, a psychopath will have narcissistic attributes and Machiavellian attributes. So you can't say somebody's a true narcissist without being Machiavellian or being a psychopath. Vice versa, somebody that's got, Machiavellian traits will also have psychopathic traits. So the thing I find interesting is that I have met narcissists that are very low in psychopathy, very low in Machiavellianism. In fact, I've met people that can only talk about themselves. That's the only topic of interest to them. But that do actually try and help other people and don't have sort of other dark traits of narcissism. It's very fascinating. There are also in the world a lot of psychopaths. Now, originally, when I first started investigating this, they had estimated that the number of psychopaths in society was about 1 in 100. Today, I believe it's 1 in 50 is the estimate. And psychopaths, again, now when you think of psychopaths, you think of a heinous killer, somebody like one of these serial killers or something. Certainly that's a psychopath. But there are a lot of psychopaths. In fact, you've met them. You may even be one. But there are psychopaths that don't kill people. They're not interested in that. They're interested in other things. And they're not quote-unquote bad people. They're not quote-unquote evil. They're just psychopaths. In other words, they have the traits of they have psychopathic traits and narcissistic traits and Machiavellian traits. But when somebody becomes a narcissist or somebody is a narcissist, they have more of those traits, say, than Machiavellian traits. Or if somebody's a psychopath, they have more of those traits than, say, narcissist or Machiavellian traits. And there's a reason for that. For example, Machiavellianism requires a certain level of intelligence that not everybody possesses. Machiavellianism kind of is a sign of intelligence. So I'm going to go through the different dark triads and just give you my impression of them and how I use them in my game. So I'll start with narcissism. So with narcissism, you have basically two different kinds of narcissists. You have the vulnerable narcissist, you have the overt narcissist. The overt narcissist is sort of the one that we're more used to. That's the one portrayed the most in television and so forth. So an overt narcissist would be, in my opinion, like Roxanne off of the what was that? Roseanne, the TV show Roseanne, not the actress, of course, but the actor that played Roseanne, or the character of Roseanne, was pretty narcissistic, pretty high on the old narcissistic scale. And the reason for that is that somebody who has sort of taken on a lot of traits of narcissism and sort of embraced, especially in an overt way, they tend to be aggressive. They tend to dominate other people. They really exaggerate their self-importance. They tend to have a lot of self-confidence, and they tend to have low empathy for people around them. So, for example, ripping on your kids 24/7, making fun of your kids, insulting your kids, what that does for a narcissist is it makes them feel way better about themselves. And, doing that to your kids, of course, is very safe, because your kids can be programmed that they can't fight back. They're not emotionally able to, obviously, because they're very young. An overt narcissist will start to also insult, belittle, try and make others around them look less than they are at, say, a workplace. So their underlings, they can start doing that to their underlings. And it gives them a sense of power. It gives them a sense of grandiosity, which is what they're seeking seeking out. So so how I would use, okay, so I'll explain the vulnerable narcissist. Now, a vulnerable narcissist is somebody who doesn't always feel superior. So an overt narcissist is always going to feel superior to everybody around them. They're smarter, they're stronger, they're faster, whatever it is. You might see an athlete. I'm better than everybody else because I'm faster. You might see another athlete. I'm better than everybody else because I can throw a ball further. You might see another person say, I'm better than everybody around me because I think more quickly. I get higher scores on tests. You might see somebody else thinking that they're better than everybody else because their mommy told them that they were, and so therefore they must be. Or perhaps they have a group of people telling them that they're better than everybody else, and they've sort of started to believe it, and they're drinking the Kool-Aid. That's your overt narcissist. But your vulnerable narcissist is someone who goes back and forth. They sometimes feel superior to other people. They sometimes feel inferior to other people. And so they sometimes they'll withdraw into themselves. Sometimes they'll pull back a little bit from grandiosity, from aggressive, dominant behavior. Very often they just go into depressions, have wild mood swings, that sort of thing. Now, they still do the things that the overt narcissist does, and they still have that sense of inflated superiority over other people, but they can sometimes feel inferior. So one of the interesting things about narcissists, both vulnerable and overt, is the idea of narcissistic wound. So if you have a narcissist and you've insulted that narcissist can get very angry at you and array all their resources at destroying your life and trying to make you look inferior to them. And the reason for that is because both versions of narcissism, deep down, the person has a deep fear of inferiority. So anybody who challenges their own sense of superiority risks causing a narcissistic injury to the narcissist, and that includes vulnerable narcissists. Now, even though they're feeling inferior, if you don't treat them like they're special, they can get very angry, particularly if you're an underling. It's interesting if somebody they feel, well, they don't really feel people are superior to them, but, someone of equal or so to them, they can sometimes put up with a little bit, but eventually they're going to come after them. So narcissism. Oh, there's one other thing about narcissists which is fascinating, is that you can also have a covert narcissist. So you can have a covert vulnerable narcissist. And all covert means is that they're very intelligent. They know that they're narcissistic and they attempt to hide it. And that's fairly common too. So, but if a person isn't particularly intelligent and they don't know that they're a narcissist, which is very hard. Narcissists very rarely know that they're narcissists. People around them might know, but the narcissists themselves don't know. So, but a covert one has an idea, or they at least know that they should be hiding it. And because they've got they've got a little bit more awareness, which would lead them to being more Machiavellian. And I'll get to that in a minute. So, narcissist, in a game sense, let's say the heroes come back with a dragon horde and they have all this money and the richest man in town is a narcissist. This is a turning point. And for all of these, I've got turning points when these guys actually become quote-unquote evil. So for the narcissist, when they see the players coming with all that gold, they're going to get intensely jealous. It's going to make them question their superiority, and it's going to anger the narcissist, and the narcissist is going to do everything they can to destroy them or take away their wealth. And that is the turning point when this narcissist becomes truly evil. Now, you can say, well, they're already evil because they're running down and destroying lives around them of people that they consider less than themselves. And yeah, that's fair. If they're like that, if they're behaving that way, then yeah, that's pretty bad. But like I say, I've known narcissist people that don't actually do that. They think they're all that. They think they're, they think they're incredibly special. The world, that they're better and so forth. But they actually try and help people. They're actually not manipulative. I've met people like that. They do actually exist. So that's narcissism. So how I would use this in a game, for example, is like the wealthy person who suffers a narcissistic injury because the heroes just show up and they're wealthy. There could be one that shows up, they don't like that the players are higher level. They don't like that the players have fighters and they think they should be the best fighter, or maybe they're the best magic user. You could have a narcissistic magic user that is insulted by the presence of another magic user. And that's all it takes. It just takes the presence of somebody that challenges their belief in their superiority deep down. Now, they would never admit it. They're not even aware of it. They just have this immense anger towards this person and start arraying all their resources to attack that person. So that's how I would use narcissism. And also narcissism, in my opinion, would be dragons are a great example of narcissism. In symbology, sort of in a Jungian way, dragons, I think, symbolize greed. So I've always wondered, how does a dragon get its hoard? And I think a dragon gets its hoard by a combination of narcissism and Machiavellianism. Dragons manipulate creatures around them to bring them money, to bring them tribute, and they amass their hoards that way. That's one way. Or they find an abandoned empire or something and a treasure hoard, and they just come to sit on it. That's another way. I've always thought another way, too, that dragons might actually eat treasure and then poop it out in big mounds of poop and treasure. That was a thing. Sorry. But, I tend to want to know why these things are the way they are. Does it have a place in fantasy? Well, you know what? It has a place in my fantasy. So, that's narcissism. Psychopathy. With psychopathy, this one's really interesting. Like I say, there are people that are psychopaths, a lot of them, that don't actually go around killing people. So criminality is basically the desire for immediate gratification. So if a criminally minded person wants a car, for example, then their mind will instantly go to stealing a car. Not to getting a job, saving up the money, putting a down payment, building up a credit score, and then being able to buy the car that they want. No, their mind goes to, I really want that car, I'll steal it, I can drive it around. So, I'll just lift off some of the traits of a psychopath. They are very charming. It's a superficial charm, but they can be very charming to people around them. Right? Now, again, narcissists can as well, because narcissists have psychopathic traits as well. Narcissism tends to be very attractive. The psychopath tends to be grandiose. They want to be flashy. They want to flash money around. They want to look like the big man, the big woman, the big whatever. The psychopaths tend to need a lot of stimulation. They get bored very easily. So they'll just start shit. Psychopaths tend to be pathological liars. They can't tell the truth to save their lives. They tend to be manipulative. So if they want something, they'll manipulate the people around them so that they can get it. They lack remorse and guilt. That's the big one. Everybody's very used to that, how a psychopath can do something really horrendous and feel nothing about it. No, that's, there's degrees of that. That's on a spectrum. They have a shallow affect. They lack empathy. They have a parasitic lifestyle. So a psychopath is very good for, say, a thief class, in that they would prefer to do the least amount for the biggest payoff, which, of course, would bring you towards crime. They have poor behavioral control. They tend to be promiscuous. They tend to have had a lot of trouble, gotten in a lot of trouble with the law and so forth when they were young, a lot of trouble with parents. They they tend to lack long-term goals. So if I were to have an NPC that I thought was a psychopath, you know, their goal might be to someday be to start an empire. So you meet somebody who say is somebody living in a village, and they tell you that they're going to one day have an entire empire that spans the whole world. That's pretty grandiose, right? They're impulsive. They're irresponsible. So in the 5-factor model, you've got the conscientiousness. Psychopath would be low in that. So you've got openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, the A one. I always forget the A one. And neuroticism. Right? Anyway, so it'll come to me, but because I'm recording this, I suddenly can't remember it, of course. I should have written it down, but I have it memorized. I shouldn't need to, but here we are. So anyway, so the psychopath, how I think of a psychopath, from things I've seen on the net and what I've read and whatever, the psychopath is basically somebody who should be moral but isn't. So if you think of a grizzly bear, and a grizzly bear is coming to eat you, the grizzly bear looks exactly the same as a grizzly bear walking away from you. A grizzly bear coming to eat you looks exactly the same as a grizzly bear walking along a ridge. The grizzly bear has absolutely no remorse. Now, I'm not saying the psychopath, or that a grizzly bear is a psychopath. It certainly isn't, because we don't expect the grizzly bear to be moral. So the grizzly bear is an animal, and it's just doing what an animal does. But intelligent, humans and intelligent races that are human-like, we expect them to have a moral compass. And a true psychopath, like a really bad one, doesn't. And they will come at you with the same look on their face and do horrendous things to you as they would walking away from you or walking through town. One thing about a psychopath is they have trouble gauging the severity of things. So they might equate jaywalking with murder. They might say, well, they're both wrong, you shouldn't do them. They can pay lip service to that. But they have trouble understanding that, well, actually jaywalking is very minor, murder is very bad, shoplifting is worse than jaywalking, but it's not as bad as murder, if you see what I mean. Because they're sort of like the bear, they just come at you. So psychopaths, again, with a psychopath, what happens if a party runs into a psychopath, then the psychopath, because they're parasitic, they're going to try and get stuff from the players, whatever method they can. They might try and manipulate, but they might just try and steal it. They might try and tax it. They might whatever. The other thing is that if the players somehow get in between what the psychopath wants, and then all of a sudden the psychopath might turn on the players, might become the enemy of the players. I think the psychopath is the least dangerous of all these, of the dark triad types. Because certainly the narcissist and the Machiavellian, they're not less capable of doing horrendous things than the psychopath, but they're a lot more hidden. The psychopaths sort of can't help themselves because they're impulsive. They have no self-control. So you might think the psychopath would be like the leader of a gang, because in the underclass, violence is power. Showing that you don't care is power. Being horrid is power. Like being violent pulls everybody so into alignment, scares everybody into behaving. So the leader of a thieves guild, for example, more than likely is a psychopath. And if you get in between what the leader of a thieves guild wants, or if you have something that the leader of a thieves guild wants, well, you've got a real problem here. And then you've got a real bad guy. A real bad guy. Not just labeled evil, but actually evil, willing to do horrendous things to get what they want. So Machiavellianism, again, named after this guy, who wrote the book The Prince. Machiavellianism is someone who it can be called, is almost has ESP. In fact, because they're so good with social skills. They're amazing at reading people. They tend to be high in anxiety, right, neuroticism, but they understand people really well. And they use flattery and they use other manipulations, deceit, to get what they want. So Machiavellianism is almost a must for, say, politics, in my opinion. I've seen very few politicians that don't exhibit pretty high Machiavellianist attributes. It's one of the reasons they lie so easily and so quickly. But there are other Machiavellians around. And Machiavellianism, you're not going to have somebody that's just a Machiavellian. They're also going to have some narcissist traits, some psychopathic traits. So, but Machiavellianism does tend to correlate with intelligence. So they do tend to be a little bit smarter. And the reason for that is because it really does require a lot of sort of social skills to navigate through, court intrigues or political landmines or, work environment where there's problems. They can manipulate people and move through it. So the thing about Machiavellians is that they tend to be amoral. That means they don't have a moral compass, so they can do whatever they want in general, and they tend to be aloof. Now they're not going to display their amorality so that everybody can see it. They're very intelligent. They know that they have to pay lip service to whatever morality is current in their society. But they don't necessarily adhere to it. They'll do whatever they want. So you can see how these are very closely related, right? They have low empathy. They lack introspection. That means that they don't really have a great awareness of themselves. They don't look at what they're doing very well. I just watched a video with George Soros where he was saying that when he makes money, he doesn't consider the social consequences of his actions. That's classic Machiavellianism. They don't tend to be very creative, and they don't tend to know their own feelings, which is very interesting, because unlike the narcissist, where you can cause a narcissistic injury, a Machiavellian, if it's in their best interest to laugh at you belittling them, they may just do it. They may be able to make fun of themselves if it gets them what they want in the sort of environment, in the environment that they find themselves in. So that's Machiavellianism. And a sort of quote-unquote evil character, somebody that your heroes might run into, can have sort of a combination of these things. This is pretty complicated, but I do use it in my game quite a bit because I find that it gives me a lot of plot lines. It gives me a lot more bad guys to play with. And also it kind of gives me a clue as to why, say, for example, kobolds might be hated by people. Kobolds might be hated because the kobolds do something that the humans don't like. So, for example, they might eat people. Well, cannibalism is pretty bad, so that would prompt a village to, and everybody in it to say, "Ooh, the kobolds are bad because they eat people." But they're going to seem psychopathic to the village, and the village is going to portray them that way and portray them as evil. So that's basically the Dark Triad, and a little bit of how I use it in my games. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to call it here. And thank you for watching, and I hope that you'll leave a like and subscribe. And I'm just grazing the surface of this. Like if you want to implement this in your game, then I would recommend doing some reading on it. And I'm not a psychologist or anything. I don't. This is just all from my own experience and how I use this in my games. And I do use the 5-factor model in my game as well to describe, say, NPCs and so forth. And I do use the Dark Triad in my games as well. And I found it extremely helpful to give me a sense of why someone is evil, why the big bad is acting the way they are. Not so much if they're monsters, although I do like to give the monsters attributes from the Dark Triad, because then it makes the idea that they're evil a lot more realistic in my mind. Less that they drank from the elixir of evil and just suddenly became magically evil. Also known as we have an excuse to kill it and we can just put our brains on hold and just slay everything, become murder hobos. Which is essentially what the alignment system is. Labeling a monster evil is basically saying, hey, murder hobos, it's evil. Don't really have to explain why, just they are. That doesn't sit well with me. Anyway, thanks for watching this video. I hope that you'll leave a like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And I hope that, that you'll join me again. All right, take care.